Hey everybody, welcome to the final episode of the Negligence series, the Dylan Redwine Story. I am joined here by a special guest today, but before we get into those introductions and get started on this episode, I wanted to take a moment and say thank you to my new patrons. Jennifer N., Tosh, Julie M., Yelena, Miss Linz, Lisa, Anita Q, Justin P., Alexandria D. Thank you all so much for being patrons this month. It means so much to me and it helps keep the lights on and pay for this really cool new device I have. You may be noticing a difference in the sound quality. I got this Chaotica eyeball, which is pretty cool. It's supposed to be a substitute for a sound booth. So hopefully you are noticing a difference. All right, so that's it. Thank you so much. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/trueconsequences or ko-fi.com/trueconsequences. Let's get into the story. Okay, so when we last left off here with the Dylan Redwine story, we've been through the entire trial. You heard from Bob Mata on his take on things. You heard the closing arguments from the prosecutor. You heard the closing arguments from the defense, as well as the rebuttal by the prosecution. So you should have a good idea of how the trial went just from those clips as well. But there are lots of clips available for the whole trial. There's a lot on my YouTube channel. I didn't get every single session, but I got probably 80-90% of them. The rest you can find elsewhere on YouTube, I'm sure. The entire trial is there. So if you're curious about, how the whole trial went, it's 5 weeks long. You can watch it. It's available. It's long. I want you to hear directly from the jury's verdict. So we'll play that video or audio, depending on if you're listening or watching. And then you will hear the sentencing from the judge.
All right. The court has been informed that the jury has reached a verdict, and we are on the record of the case of People versus Mark Redwine, 17 CR 343. Initially, I want to make a few comments while the jury's on its way up. This has been an extremely difficult case for everybody involved. It's been difficult for the parties, for the attorneys, for their staff. It's been difficult for the families, the entire community. This case has taken a lot of resources from the entire state as well as Atlanta County. The planning to try and get this case to go as well as it did was extensive. I want to thank all the hard work from all the court staff that have worked on this case. Atlanta County, the administration, and their employees have done a tremendous amount of work trying to make sure that everything went off safe and smoothly. I specifically want to thank security personnel for everything that they've done. I've done really complex cases, both as a prosecutor, as defense counsel, and as a judge. I know how much work both sides have done on this case. It's a tremendous amount of effort that the attorneys and their staff have put into it. And I just want to let you know that I appreciate everyone's effort. The other thing that I wanted to mention before the jury got here is we have talked about how long the process this has been. Emotions are running very high from both sides. However, this is a court of law. I expect everyone in this courtroom to behave appropriately. If anyone behaves inappropriately, they're going to be removed. I have no idea what the verdict's going to be, and I expect everybody to express any emotions they may have after they leave the courthouse. Everybody rise for the jury? All right, we can be seated. Mr. Parker, are you the foreman of the jury? Yes. And I've been informed that the jury has reached a verdict prior to receiving the answer to the question that it sent up? Yes. And is this verdict unanimous? Would you hand the verdict forms to Cindy, please? Mr. Redwine, would you please stand up? Jury verdict count number 1, murder in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Redwine, guilty of count number 1. Be quiet, please. Murder in the second degree, signed by Mr. Parker. Jury verdict, count number 2, child abuse. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Redwine, guilty of count 2, child abuse, signed by Colin Parker. Further, we, the jury, find that with respect to the verdict question as to this count, as follows. Did the child abuse result in death? The answer is yes, signed by Mr. Parker. You can be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, you have now completed your duties as jurors in this case and are discharged with a thanks to the court. The question may arise whether you may now discuss this case with lawyers, defendant, or other persons. For your guidance, I'm instructing you that whether you talk to anyone or not is entirely your decision. It is proper for others to discuss this case with you, and you may talk to them, but you do not need to do so. If you talk to them, you may tell them as much or as little as you want about your deliberations and facts that influence your decision. If any person persists in discussing this case over your objection or becomes critical of your jury service, either before or after any discussions begun, please report it to me. If you have any questions that I can answer, just wait for me in the jury room. There's a few things that I need to do prior to coming down there. It shouldn't take very long. I know it's also been a long time for you guys. If you want to take off, you're certainly free to do that. But I really appreciate all the work you've done into it. It's been a tough case. I know it's been a tough case on you guys as well as everybody else. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the state of Colorado for all the work that you've done. Everybody rise for the jury, and you go down to the jury room. Everybody be seated. Mr. Champagne, are you anticipating a full day or close to a day for sentencing?
Yes, Judge.
All right. Just a second. Initially, I'm going, Mr. Redwine no longer has a right to bond. He will be held without bond in any sentencing. All right, we're on the record on 17 CR 343. We're scheduled for sentencing. The rules in the courtroom are that everyone is going to wear a mask unless they're speaking on the record. If they want to remove their mask to speak on the record, I prefer it. But it's not going to be required unless we can't understand somebody, particularly the reporter. So, with that, Mr. Champagne, are you ready for sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor.
And Mr. Moran, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I want to let everybody know that anyone, particularly people coming to speak at the sentencing, needs to speak loudly, slowly, and you need to talk into the microphones. So, Mr. Moran, in addition to yourself and Mr. Redwine, do you have anybody who wants to speak at sentencing? Oh, you're on.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Champagne, do you have anyone?
Yes, Your Honor.
And who would that be?
Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, Brandon Redwine, and the prosecution team.
Well, you'll get your chance. Who wants to go first?
The people would bring forward Elaine Hall.
Ms. Hall, come on up to the lectern, please. And this is your chance to tell me what you want to tell me. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you hear me?
I can.
I'm really nervous, so
It's okay.
bear with me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it. Obviously, when I say you, I'm not referring to you. This is all directed at Mr. Redwine. As I stand here today, I think about what has transpired in the last 9 years and all the heartbreak and unknowing and hope and everything else that we have lived through. And I can't help but go back to one person, and that is Mr. Redwine. We obviously did not see eye to eye on many things, which is obviously why our marriage didn't work. But I never thought that he would take out his frustration that he had with the family on Dylan. But then I think about it, he always picks on the weakest, so it totally makes sense. Dylan was 13 years old when he took his life. He had his whole life ahead of him to make major accomplishments, and you know he would have done it, and he would have done it well. You robbed him of his youth. You robbed him of what he would have been. And you did all that to put him in the mountains where animals could scavenge his bones. You had no remorse, no regret. You never take accountability for any of your actions. You never have and you never will. So whatever I say at this moment is not going to resonate. It is going to go in one ear and out the other, just like everything else in this trial. It's very frustrating to me that you never take accountability. It's also very frustrating to me with what you put our family through and what you put this community through. You knew where Dylan was the whole time we were looking for him, and not once did you offer up any advice or any suggestion as to where he would be. The night that you hurt Dylan, you should have done the right thing and called 911 and let them figure it out, instead of taking his body and letting him be scavenged on a mountain. When I think about what happened that night, it breaks my heart to think about Dylan looking up at his dad knowing he's the killer. He is my killer. It breaks my heart. And I wonder, what were you thinking then when you saw his big old blue eyes? I mean, I don't even think that it fazed you, which is why you really need to have the maximum sentence, because you have a lot of soul searching to do and a lot of forgiveness to get from people, and you need to learn to forgive yourself for so many mistakes that you have made over the years. The selfishness, the control, the emotional abuse, the mental abuse that we have suffered under your reign is no more for us anymore. Once this is done, you're out of my life, and I'm very happy about that. I don't know what will happen to you, and quite frankly, whatever happens to you, you did to yourself. You could have lived a good life. There's a lot of good things that still happen. You will never meet your biological grandchildren. I mean, there's so much you gave up. And then you say that the trial was a sham and that you always stood up for, or you always had remorse when you did something wrong. No, that's not true. You never had remorse. You still don't have remorse. You have always been worried about yourself, and you continue to worry about yourself. So I hope you take the time to really think about, you know, what you have done with your life and how many people you hurt. Because the day you took Dylan, you also, in many respects, took my mother, because she died of a broken heart from missing Dylan. Thanksgiving holiday, all these people are out looking for Dylan. You're nowhere to be found. They invested their time and energy and money in looking for our son when you knew where he was. So with that, you know, I could say so much more, but like I said, it's not going to change anything. I'm just glad that we are free from you and that you will not be free to hurt us anymore. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Champagne?
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call forward Brandon Redwine.
All right, come on up, Mr. Redwine, and whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to thank the court for allowing this moment to obviously voice my thoughts to the court. And I want to make it very clear that with what I'm saying is reflective of kind of what we went through for 9 years trying to figure out what happened. And some of the frustration that was caused by Mark just not taking any responsibility. So, Mr. Redwine, I want you to know that your actions alone have led you to this moment. Your actions have made it so you will never see your grandkids. You will never be a meaningful part of my life either. here are some of the things that are important for me to let you know. I hope that one day you can take responsibility for what you did to Dylan. I hope that you are not too proud to ask for forgiveness. I hope that you recognize that this is not Elaine's fault, nor is it my mom's fault. I hope that you understand that you have taught me how to be a better man. I saw your physicality with my mom and your absence from my life, and that taught me what not to do. I also hope that you see that you will never be called Dad. I have Juice, Corey has Mike, Mark changed his name from yours, and we know what happened with Dylan. And that is all your responsibility, Mark. I hope you recognize and take accountability for what you've done.
The people call forward Corey Redwine.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Redwine.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The past 9 years without Dylan have been nothing short of misery. It's hard for me to speak in front of you today and say I have been victimized when I think of what Dylan went through. The more I think about what has happened, the more I understand how Mark's actions have made me a victim. What did I and Dylan do to deserve this? We looked up to Mark and have always tried to make him proud. I also think of the addiction to alcohol I have relied on so much through these years. What could I have done differently to keep Dylan away from the evil that consumes Mark? I think about our differences and how I could have also been in the same position as Dylan. While my kids will never meet Dylan or their real grandfather, I often think of what I could have done differently as the older brother who was also raised in fear. See, I can't change the hate in Mark's heart, and I can't blame myself for his mistakes. I can only learn from them. I can't bring Dylan back. I can only remember him. I can't talk to Dylan, so I pray to him, and I can't see Dylan, so I dream of him. Mark may have physically taken him, and I can't change that. But what I can do is tell the world how a 13-year-old young man stood up to his then 50-year-old father and said all the things I regret never saying. Dylan is my hero and became more of a man in 13 years than Mark has in 60. I'm so proud of Dylan and what he stood for. I'm sorry for the beautiful woman who will never share his love and for the people who will never share his common love for all. It inspires me that Dylan's actions over the course of his life are what will be remembered and not Mark's words and his lies. Dylan's name will run through our family forever, and his stories will be shared by all who loved him. Mark's name will no longer have meaning to all those who loved him and will be replaced with whatever is left in his heart. Mark always told me as a kid, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. His selfish ways have caught up with him, and he got exactly that himself. He also said, no one will ever love you like you real, Dad. But like much of the past 9 years, that too was a lie. Mike is our dad, not because he must be, but because he wants to be. He has treated Dylan and I as if we were his own kids. My kids love their papa, and he loves them. He picks up the slack not only when they see their uncle on TV all the time and can't meet him, but also to celebrate all of their accomplishments. I wish I could be proud to have Mark as my father, as does Dylan, but instead, I'm writing a painful part of my life that stays with him. I can no longer carry the Mark's burden like I did as a child, filling the pair of shoes he left when he left us. That's on Mark. Some things are worse than death, and living with the choices he has made is now his own responsibility and no longer ours. There's a long walk alone into a place that only a convicted killer can understand, and that's what's in his mind, and that's all that's left. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Redwine. And Mr. Moran, did you want to make a sentencing argument?
Mr. Redwine loved Dylan with all of his heart. The depth of grief Dylan's loved ones have experienced may never leave a high water mark. Hopefully, there is some comfort for them found in the expression of hurt and anger these proceedings have epitomized. Mr. Redwine is eager for fair and impartial review by a higher court. He is appealing and wishes to make no further record here.
All right. Mr. Champagne.
Your Honor, you have presided over this case from the very beginning, and as you just noted, you've seen it from the earliest days of the investigation. You watched as the community searched for Dylan, hoping against hope that he was still alive. You've seen the case progress over time, from the sad day that Dylan's remains were found on the side of Middle Mountain to the indictment of Mark Redwine by the grand jury. You presided over the motions hearings, watched the evidence develop, and the parties prepared their cases for trial. And you heard every day of the 5-week trial culminating in Mark Redwine's conviction for the murder of his son Dylan. You have all the facts, details, and information you need to hand down the right sentence in this case. The maximum sentence under the law, the full 48 years in prison. But I want to emphasize some things for you as we proceed through the sentencing hearing. I want to speak about the impact that this has had on his family, how the behavior of Mark Redwine that led up to the brutal murder of Dylan and his behavior afterwards exponentially increased the suffering of Dylan's family and this entire community. But first, I want to talk to you about Dylan and what his loss means for all of us. Your Honor, I've worked this case from the very beginning, and over these last 9 years, I feel like I've gotten a glimpse into Dylan through the words and emotions of his family and friends, their stories about his behavior, their relationships with him, and their time with him during his young life. I know that his family misses him every single day. His mother Elaine, brother Corey, and stepdad Mike all miss him every single day. They all knew how special he was, his true potential, and how great he could be. They believed in him. They believed in the beauty that he could bring into this world. He was a young man who shone brightly, just starting the prime of his life as he grew from adolescence into adulthood. He was precocious and smart and full of life. He never met a stranger, and he could fill up the room with his vibrance and liveliness. He put a smile on everyone's face and filled them with light and happiness. And he connected with everyone around him. And people felt connected to him. People loved him. They loved him for the character that he was, and he was quite a character by all accounts. An earnest young man who wore his emotions on his sleeve for the world to see. People say that when he loved you with everything that he had. When he was being a rascal, he did it with a fun-loving heart. And when he was confused or frustrated or angry with the world around him, he let everyone know. His bond with his brother Corey was beyond close. They shared everything. And Corey was a trusted confidant with whom he could share his deepest feelings. Questions about growing up, about life, about how to navigate this topsy-turvy world, he went to Corey. When things came up that he couldn't talk to his mother about, the hard stuff, he went to Corey. When he had the toughest times dealing with his dad, he went to Corey. Because he knew he could trust Corey, and Corey would help him and guide him, and he understood what Dylan was going through. He knew Dylan like no other person on the face of this earth. And their bond went beyond mere brotherhood. It was a deep admiration and respect and love that most of us can only wish for. Mike Hall, his stepfather, was a trusted role model and father figure for Dylan. As Dylan grew and began to understand that his real father was a deeply flawed man, he looked to Mike for inspiration about what a man should be. Honest and loving yet firm, he understood how to walk that fine line as a stepfather, seeing that Dylan needed structure and discipline, but also needed a safe place to bring his tough questions, and someone he could go to as a reliable, trusted adult. Mike was that rock for Dylan, solid ground in what was sometimes a swirling sea. and of course Elaine, his mother. Their relationship really cannot be put into words. Dylan and Elaine shared a special bond that can only exist between a mother and a son. Deep, deep love and trust. Dylan knew that she would always be there for him, always take care of him when he needed her, no matter what. To nurture him in his times of trouble with a big hug, or just listen if he needed to talk. To keep him in line when he strayed, and to call him out when he needed it, always knowing it came from a place of love and with his best interest at heart. She was the one who took the reins when things got crazy and guided him through the tough times. She always had a plan, a way to get through the challenges, to keep him safe and make sure he had everything he needed in this world. She was there for him, to protect him and keep him safe, to nurture and guide him, to help him grow into the man that everyone knew he could be. And what she wouldn't give for one more chance to hug him and tell him how much she loved him. What they all wouldn't give to see him one more time, to see his smile, the sparkle in his eyes, his laugh, to hear his voice, see his face, feel his embrace, to hear him say, "I love you" to each and every one of them one more time, and have the chance to tell him how much they loved him and missed him every single day. But that was stolen from them, stolen from Dylan, stolen by this man, Dylan's father, the one who was supposed to be there for him, the one who was supposed to love him and nurture him, the one who was supposed to protect him and keep him safe. Instead, he took Dylan's life. He stole it from him, stole it from his family. And as a result, they will never get to see Dylan's life unfold, to see the special moments, to watch him grow, go off to college, fall in love, have children of his own. They'll never get to see the man that Dylan could have become. Instead, this man caused Dylan's death in a heinous and brutal act of violence. He knowingly murdered his own son. He violated the sacred trust that is the highest duty of every parent, to protect your child at all costs. He committed the most unforgivable crime in our society, the murder of a child, his own child. And for that, he deserves the fullest measure of justice this court can hand down under the law, 48 years in prison, and nothing less. But it's not just the simple, terrible fact that he killed his own son and robbed the world of that beautiful, bright light. This crime is aggravated on so many levels. At every turn, at every opportunity, Mark Redwine has maximized and prolonged the suffering of everyone involved in this case, especially Dylan's family, but also this whole community. From the heinous and ghoulish acts immediately following Dylan's death, to his cowardly efforts to hide the truth and actively sabotage this investigation, to his continual blame of others and refusal to accept responsibility, to his cold-hearted lack of remorse. Mark Redwine has exponentially exacerbated the harm and pain inflicted by his actions on Dylan's family and on this entire community. To understand the impacts of this crime, we have to understand the context of the crime. In the years after their separation and divorce, Mark Redwine became obsessed with his hatred for Elaine Hall. We heard testimony about the bitterness of their divorce, the acrimony he felt toward Elaine, but that really doesn't do it justice. This was an almost pathological hatred, and Mark Redwine looked for every way he could to cause her to suffer. First, it was the property disputes arising from their divorce, fighting at every turn to make her suffer. When that was finally settled, he turned to custody over Dylan as the battleground, and at every turn and through every avenue he could think of, he sought to extract suffering from Elaine Hall and to try to steal custody of Dylan away from her. Never mind the fact that he was gone for work, spending months of time out in the oil fields, not in a position to be a good father, utilizing almost none of his parenting time. But this wasn't about spending time with Dylan. He could do that whenever he wanted. This was about making sure that she suffered, that she felt pain. And he knew that nothing could hurt her more than losing one of her children. So that's where he directed all of his fury. Attacking her to the child family investigator, attacking her to the court, filing contempt pleading after contempt pleading against her. We see Mark also attempting to woo Dylan to his side, trying to win him over, buying him expensive things, taking him on trips, filling up his bank account with more money than any 13-year-old should ever have. We see him forming a plan that he thought would culminate in the custody hearing on September of 2012, where Dylan would affirmatively state that he wanted to live with him instead of Elaine. But that's not what happened. Because when Dylan went into chambers that day, he didn't choose his dad. He chose his mom and his brother Corey and his stepdad Mike. And despite all of his efforts, his years-long campaign to turn the court against Elaine and to turn Dylan against Elaine, when the moment of truth came, Dylan chose Elaine over him. In Mark's mind, Elaine had brainwashed Dylan against him, tricked him into choosing her over him. Mark believed that Elaine had poisoned Corey against him earlier, and now she had poisoned Dylan against him too. And this drove his hatred for her to new heights. In reality, Dylan had become disillusioned with Mark, but because of Mark's own actions, not Elaine's. Dylan had come to learn that Mark was not the man he thought he was, not the role model he wanted to follow. And he was constantly bad-mouthing and disparaging the people Dylan loved most in the world, Corey and Elaine. Mark was trying constantly to turn Dylan against them, and he resented Mark for it. This is the context of Dylan's visit on November 18th, 2012. This is the true story of what Dylan was walking into when he got off that plane. Dylan didn't want to be there. He was done with his dad, hadn't spoken to him in months, and wanted nothing to do with him. You can see the disdain he felt towards his father immediately after his arrival. The distances he kept between them, the coldness of his interactions. From the moment he got off the plane, no hugs, no happy reunion, no smiles. Instead, the first thing he did is ask to get away from his father as quickly as he could, to sleep over at his friend Ryan Nava's house. This is the tension that Mr. Doherty spoke about so eloquently in his closing argument, and you can feel it when you review the evidence. It's palpable. And after a few short hours, Dylan was gone, murdered at the hands of this man. The harm that Mark Redwine inflicted on his own child, his own family, and this community can never be understated. He stole this bright, beautiful boy's life from him and from us all. But, Your Honor, that's only the beginning of the terrible acts that Mark Redwine perpetrated. And in the aftermath of Dylan's brutal murder, we see what Mark Redwine is truly made of, the person that he truly is. Mark Redwine killed Dylan in an unspeakable act of violence, knowingly murdered him. Dylan's skull bore a fracture so powerful and severe, it would have killed him. But then Mark Redwine committed an act so truly evil, it cannot be spoken. But we must speak it. As Dylan lay there dying at the hands of Mark Redwine, he executed a plan so callous and brazen as to be beyond understanding. A plan he had conceived of years earlier. The exact same plan that he described to his first wife, Betsy Horvath, when he was married to her. Years earlier, he told her what he would do if he ever had to get rid of a body. He told her he would find some remote place in the mountains, somewhere no one would ever find it, and let the wild animals feed on the remains until there was no evidence left. And that's exactly what he did to Dylan. Only an unspeakable evil deep within a person could ever conceive of such a plan, much less execute such a plan with his own child's body. He took Dylan, his beautiful boy, up the side of Middle Mountain in his Dodge truck to a place he thought no one would ever find him. And he dumped his body like a piece of trash, hidden in a place where only the animals of the wild would find him, and let them feed on his poor child's dead body until almost all of him was gone. But that's not all. He took Dylan's head and he removed it from the rest of the remains, and he moved it to an entirely different place on the mountain in a desperate hope that no one would ever find it, knowing that if they did, they could identify it as Dylan's and link the murder back to him. Your Honor, these facts are beyond dispute. The jury has spoken in a clear and unmistakable, unified voice. This man is guilty of these acts. It's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. They're no longer in dispute. Why would someone ever do such a thing? He did this all to hide the terrible truth of what he had done and to save his own skin. This unholy act of desecration of Dylan's remains is so outrageous and repugnant that it is almost beyond belief. But this is exactly what the evidence shows. And we must speak the truth of what happened to Dylan so that we may know the measure of this man, and therefore the sentence he deserves for what he has done, the maximum sentence. Hiding Dylan's body there on the mountainside, he tried to hide the truth from all of us. And in doing so, he exponentially increased the suffering of Dylan's family and of our whole community. As Elaine stated earlier, when the time came to tell the truth about what happened, to own up and take responsibility, he lied. He lied to us all, over and over again, fabricating story after story about Dylan's disappearance. He led us all to believe that Dylan had simply disappeared, vanished from Vallecito without a trace. He gave interviews to the news, to the media, to the police, telling the same rehearsed and polished story again and again and again. A story that led away from him and what he had done and out into the great unknown. He watched as searchers searched deep into the night, combing the mountains around his house, looking for any trace of Dylan. He watched as dive teams dragged the lake at Vallecito, as helicopters circled overhead looking for the lost boy. He pleaded with the community to come and help, and we did. Hundreds of concerned people came forward to help, dedicating countless exhausting hours looking for Dylan, giving everything they could to find Dylan and bring him home. And he watched as a broken and shattered family assembled in Vallecito to face everyone's worst nightmare. Dylan was missing, and no one knew where he was. And as all this turmoil swirled and surrounded Mark Redwine, he said nothing, and he did nothing. And he knew exactly where Dylan was, but he said nothing. And by doing so, he inflicted a cruel and awful punishment on them, on all of us. By saying nothing, he led us all to believe that there was hope. Hope that Dylan would show up. Hope that he would come home. Hope that he would be found safe somewhere and come back to our lives and everything would be okay. Night after sleepless night, Elaine and Corey and Mike waited for some news of Dylan, but none came. Law enforcement and professionals and countless volunteers searched endlessly for some clue as to where Dylan was, but they found nothing. And as the days stretched into weeks and into months, they never gave up hope. They never stopped believing that they might find Dylan and bring him home. There's a hellish kind of agony that comes from this sort of hope. It is all-consuming, and it is exhausting. It is an imperative that no one can ignore, an instinct as strong as the will to breathe. A parent can never give up hope they will find their missing child alive. Yet every moment waiting for that day is pure hell. And Mark Redwine sat back and watched it all. He let Elaine and Corey and Mike and all of us, this whole community, suffer in this awful purgatory for months and months and months, knowing the whole time exactly where Dylan was and exactly what had happened to him. He had the key to end our suffering, but he was too much of a coward to come forward and tell us the truth of what he had done. But it goes beyond that, because instead of just denying involvement and knowledge, he actively misled law enforcement and the investigators, purposely pointing them in the wrong direction in attempts to sabotage them and prevent them from ever finding Dylan's remains. He focused all of their attention on Lake Vallecito, knowing that Dylan was on Middle Mountain. He pushed outlandish theories and fed them bogus leads about where Dylan may have gone, then upbraided them for refusing to follow up. And he constantly directed them away from Middle Mountain and argued that Dylan was abducted and secreted out of Vallecito entirely, that he was still alive out there somewhere. And he sought to manipulate this community. He tried to paint himself as the victim, the grieving father. In countless media interviews, he talked about how much he loved Dylan, how he wanted him home, how he would never give up hope that Dylan would be found alive, and that he just wanted to raise awareness to help find Dylan. Your Honor, by hiding the truth, by hiding Dylan from all of us, by actively misleading every effort to find Dylan, he exponentially increased and prolonged the suffering of all those around him. Dylan's mother, his brother, their whole family, our whole community. This aggravates the crime and helps justify the highest sentence this court can impose. Not only did Mark Redwine commit one of the most brutal acts of violence in La Plata County history, but throughout these 9 years, throughout this trial, even here today, he has shown no remorse for what he did. He has taken no responsibility whatsoever for his heinous crime. And today, this man who continues to deny the truth of what he has done, who cowardly hides from responsibility in the face of overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the clear and convincing mandate from the jury finding him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, a man who had the chance to atone for his sins, to step up like a man and accept responsibility, and to end the suffering of all involved. He stands before you, refusing to accept responsibility, showing no remorse, reflecting that same cold-hearted murderer's heart that killed Dylan Redwine. Your Honor, that's the ultimate aggravating factor that you should consider. And that alone justifies imposition of the maximum sentence in this case. 48 years for both counts. Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Champagne. Mr. Redwine, would you stand up, please? Based upon the jury verdicts in this case, I'm going to enter judgment of conviction to murder in the second degree and child abuse, acting in a knowing or reckless manner, resulting in death. Since this trial, and even before the trial was over with, but since the verdicts were returned, I've thought a lot about if you were convicted and then after you're convicted, what the appropriate sentence would be. There's some things that are in your favor. Right now, you're 60 years old. Don't have much, if any. I mean, your criminal history is extremely minor. And even though the jury found, and this court believes, that your actions caused the death of your son, you still lost your son. And that's something that you're going to have to live with forever. And I find that to be a mitigating factor. When I impose sentence, I also need to consider the fact that whatever I give you today is not going to be what you serve. You're going to be eligible for parole prior to the expiration of the term that I impose. And on top of that, I expect you'll behave similar to what you did in the jail, and you'll receive earn time, which will reduce your sentence even further. There are aggravating circumstances in this case also. First of all, you killed. Okay. First of all, you killed your son, a 13-year-old boy. At 13, he's still a little boy. As a father, it's your obligation to protect your son, to keep him from harm. And instead of that, you inflicted enough injury on him to kill him in your living room. After the passion of whatever caused you to act the way you did subsided, you didn't think about Dylan. You thought about yourself. You sanitized the crime scene. You hid Dylan's body. And you went so far as to remove his head from the rest of his body. There's only one reason to do that, and that's to try and avoid, if any remains were ever found, that Dylan would ever be identified. You left his body to be scavenged by wild animals. Not caring that concealing Dylan's remains tremendously increased the trauma felt by this community, felt by Dylan's brothers, and felt by his mother. You continually lied about what happened, about your knowledge as to where Dylan's remains were hidden. You continue to lie despite the pain and trauma that inflicted upon Dylan's brothers and his mother, Mr. Hall, and the entire community. Your actions not only removed and deprived Dylan the opportunity to grow into a man who could be what he could have been. He's not able to get married, fall in love, have kids, and potentially have grandkids. You stole that joy from Dylan. You stole that joy from Corey and Brandon and Elaine. What they could have experienced watching Dylan to grow and mature into his full potential will never be known by them, and that's because of your actions. The evidence against you is overwhelming. However, in your statement to the probation department for the pre-sentence report, you wrote the following, and this is a quote from what you wrote. Innocent of all charges, miscarriage of justice, fake conviction, sham trial. So there is no misunderstanding. I am exercising all my rights to appeal the court's rulings and challenge the biased jury's decision to convict with no evidence any crime was committed. I take this circumstance very seriously and want to make clear that I too have lost a child I love more than life itself. I will fight for true justice, not for myself, but for Dylan. I have always shown remorse for the things that I am guilty of. Stand against fake justice, end quote. After all this time, and listening to what occurred here in this trial, in this courtroom, you still take absolutely no responsibility for what you did to Dylan. I have trouble remembering a convicted criminal defendant that has shown such an utter lack of remorse for his criminal behavior. These are all aggravating factors that leads me to believe that a lenient sentence would unduly depreciate the seriousness of your crimes and that you need significant punishment. The community needs to be protected from you. You need to be removed from society for a long period of time. I'm going to sentence you to 48 years on both counts with 5 years of parole. They are to be served concurrently. You'll receive 1,540 days of credit for time served. Deputy Robinson, you can take the defendant back to jail.
All right. So today I'm joined by a very extra special, super amazing, incredible, fantastic guest named Jackie. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, how are you, Eric?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am awesome.
Good. Jackie, tell us a little bit about you. You've had an integral part in the development of this series, but we're not going to talk about that yet. I want to hear about your shows And I want to hear about where people can find you before we go into Dylan's story.
I'm Jackie Moranty, and I do 2 podcasts. One of them I haven't done anything on for a while, called Lucky Charms Unplugged, and that one's a lot about culture and celebrations, and it's just a really happy, really light podcast to listen to. And my other one is called Cause of Death.
Which is also lighthearted.
Yeah. You can tell.
Yeah, clearly by the title.
Clearly. Cause of Death, it's all about diseases and how they are affected by politics and how communities deal with them and socioeconomics and all of the things that happen during health crisis, a major health crisis.
Spoiler alert, we don't do a great job.
Never. It's a lot about history of vaccines, history of disease, and why people incessantly die of these diseases. And then I have episodes that I've added in called 100 Seconds to Midnight. The 100 Seconds to Midnight episodes are I think they're awesome.
They're terrifying. Yeah, you hear about like post-apocalyptic. I feel like those episodes are pre-apocalyptic.
They are pre-apocalyptic.
It's scary.
But they're super amazing because even I learn a lot. The global water crisis, oh my gosh, it was a really good show.
I really love that episode. I think you did a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
I learned so much, and now I have more things to worry about. So, Jackie, I am a huge fan of your show. Everybody who listens to my show should know that. I love Cause of Death. I love Lucky Charms, but I love Cause of Death. That one I think is my favorite, and I've learned so much from listening to your show. So if you aren't listening to Jackie's shows, you definitely need to go listen. And especially because you know now that Jackie has been a driving force behind the season. She's been the key researcher. She's written a good portion, maybe more than half, maybe half of the episodes. At least half of the chapters. Yeah, definitely Jackie is talented, amazing, and incredible. So
thank you.
Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about Dylan. So Jackie, I think we were talking about this case, oh gosh, it had to have been the fall of last year.
Yeah.
Or it was like maybe late summer, right? Because I had started streaming the trial. I was running it on my YouTube channel and on Facebook. I started to get kind of obsessed with this case during that whole process. And so I remember telling you, and at this point we were just starting to kind of work together in this capacity where you've been, researching and writing for me since probably around the same time, maybe a little before.
Even a little bit before that, because there were a few episodes that I had written, I think late spring.
Okay. So we were starting to really develop this relationship of working together. And I think I told you back then that I was thinking, okay, well, I probably have enough material to do like 4, maybe 5 episodes if I'm lucky. Do you remember having that conversation?
I remember having that conversation. I remember it like it was 10 years ago.
It does feel like we've aged quite a bit. I was thinking that's what we were going to have, like 5 episodes max. And when I did the IPRA or FOIA request, it's FOIA. Everywhere else, it's IPRA in New Mexico. When I did the FOIA request with the district attorney, I was, expecting maybe a few jail calls. I was expecting maybe the arrest video. I wasn't expecting what we got.
10,000 pages plus all of the...
hundreds of hours of audio and video. And I remember I texted you and I said, we're fucked.
Yes.
I believe that was exactly what I said.
I think it was what you said. Yeah.
And you said why, and then I sent you the link and you're like, yep, we're fucked.
We're fucked.
We're fucked.
Mm-hmm, we are.
We had so much stuff to comb through, and it was, and you did most of it. So my hat's off to you. Thank you for listening to Mark's stupid voice for probably 40 or 50 hours.
Just don't say that word. Don't say that one word.
Oh, yeah. Jackie was really annoyed with how Mark pronounced a certain word. So if you saw my Twitter post a few weeks ago, then you probably saw it. And you probably know what the word is. So first of all, Jackie, what were you thinking when I first brought the idea to you to talk about Dylan's story?
Well, I thought, like you had thought, that it would probably be 4 or 5 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we might go through just the basics of what had happened during that time. There would be maybe some talk about the preceding custody case, but I really didn't think it was going to be 14 episodes. I really didn't think we were going to get that much out of it.
I kept changing it to, so then after we got that, I was like, okay, maybe we'll get like 8 episodes out of this. You know, I was still stuck on the miniseries idea. And as we started looking and digging into everything, and I started writing the first chapter and the first part of the series, I just felt like it was not going to be a good way to tell Dylan's story if I rushed it. And I know, like, I looked for quite a few places to see if anybody had actually gone in depth on his case. And, you know, I know that TZ from Tapes from the Dark Side, he did I think like a 4 or 5.
I think it was like 4 or 5 episodes.
But he didn't have probably the information that we got.
Well, his was pre-trial.
His was pre-trial. Ours was post-trial. But I would say TZ and probably California, I think it's California, those 2 podcasts probably did the most in-depth job at telling Dylan's story. I saw some episodes on YouTube that were like 17 minutes long, and I just didn't want to do that to his story. I was really affected by it.
I think he deserved more.
Yeah.
And I do think we did him justice. I think
Yeah.
we really did that story justice. We worked really hard on that.
It's when we were in production the whole time, I was just, you get stuck in a bubble when you're making this stuff and you're looking at it for hours and hours and listening to it for hours and hours and trying to make it perfect. Wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I definitely...
You are.
I definitely try to make it as good as possible. It gets overwhelming. I think there were a few times where I broke down,
Oh, yeah.
just hearing Dylan's friends talk about him, hearing his mom talk about him, hearing her attorney when she talks about telling Elaine that she has to take Dylan to Bayfield. Like, those moments, it was hard.
And I think for me, because I was more involved with Mark and getting to know him, and then some of the things that happened after his arrest. So I think for me, the most heartbreaking moments were when they brought in the dogs and they found the blood traces, but when they brought in the cadaver dogs and when they went through the house, and then just some of the things that he did and some of the things that he said. It wasn't necessarily what he said, it was the way he said it. And
what he didn't say.
And what he didn't say. Yeah, exactly, what he didn't say. And after listening to him, and I hate to say it this way, but I sort of formed this weird relationship with Mark Redwine. I mean, I listened to him for hours and days, and I analyzed, and I overdid, and I thought about it, and I'd play it again. Did he really say that? And through it all, it was those little things that really struck me. And I just couldn't believe that somebody could do what he did and be so cavalier about it.
His behavior, I think that was one of the most damning things. His behavior as well as what he said. I mean, the amount of lying that this man did, it was almost impossible to keep up with. His different, misdirections and the way he would try to change the subject, he was masterful at it.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of the time, he would lie by omission. He wouldn't necessarily tell a bald-faced lie, but he would lie by omission, and he would kind of skirt the subject and then change it. And I remember in plenty of his interviews with police, he would kind of start to go down that path and almost be to where he was going to say something that would be sort of a confession. And then he would turn around and rave at Elaine.
Right. Or talk about kids these days. You know, those kinds of things.
just completely go off the rails and change the subject.
Yeah.
Which is kind of common when you hear other people who have been convicted of murder, particularly in domestic violence situations. They'll do the same thing. They'll get so close to saying that they did it, and then they'll turn around and blame the victim or blame someone else in the family for it.
Yep. Well, that's exactly what he did. I think it's no mystery why this case, you know, struck a chord in me and why I've been so serious about covering it and trying to do justice by it. There's a lot of parallels. You know, it's not exactly the same situation that I was in, but a father figure, right, was very abusive, substance abuse problems, all those other issues. So I think there was that connection, and I think I have that kind of connection with Corey of being the brother who's left behind, you know, who's just stuck there without your best friend, essentially. And so it was really, really important for me to present this story in a non-sensational way. I think that was, you know, one of my big goals from the beginning. Even though the story itself has some sensationalism already in it, you know, like the pictures and I didn't want that to be the focus of the story because that's not Dylan's story, that's Mark's story.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't hard to ignore that. It wasn't hard to just kind of say, okay, this is what Mark is.
Yeah.
This is Mark's thing.
Yeah.
And then just move on and go into more of who Dylan was
and what happened.
And what happened to him and how things eventually came down.
I think this was one of the most difficult cases I've ever covered.
It was rough. It was rough. It was super rough. I have to say that I kind of ate, drank, and slept this case for
at least 4 months.
At least 4 months. And almost every moment that I was awake, I was thinking about, okay, so how does this fit in? And how do we piece this together? And how do we make this timeline work? And by the end, I needed to take a break.
Yeah.
It was just really hard to put all of that together and then just move on with my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that. And yeah, I had moments where I had to stop too, where I'm like, I just can't listen to this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And so some miracle, we ended up super ahead. I mean, I don't even know how that happened. I think a lot of it has to do with you, but I was also kind of motivated to get the scripts pumped out too, right? Like, so I was working pretty hard on it as well, but
and I think
you helped.
Thank you. I think that by the time we got to the middle of it, we were both so overwhelmed that we weren't sure we were going to make it to the end. And I know at about that time, I was just muscling through.
Yeah.
And just, okay, now we've started this. I have to finish it. And I was really motivated to finish it on time with the best result possible.
Well, congratulations. We did it.
We did. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. I was nervous about how this was going to go, but I think we make a good team. We work well together. You understand me. You get how I want to present things. You understand how I want things to be. And that makes it a lot easier for me because then I don't have to be like, hey, make it more like this. You already understand that. And so I can just literally pull up your script and sit at the microphone and read it. And it's like I'm reading it. Like I'm saying that. Like it's my words.
And a lot of that is because I've listened to your show since almost the beginning.
Yeah.
I was one of the first people to download True Consequences. And so I've listened to Eric. And I know how he presents things, and I know how he really relates to things. And
So what was the most memorable moment in this whole process for you, or meaningful?
I think that there was one point when I had the realization that Mark didn't remember what happened. And it's not like I gave him any sympathy or any quarter at all. But I realized that he didn't know what happened. And he was trying to figure it out. There was one point in one of his interviews where I was watching him and he kept saying, no, that couldn't have happened. That couldn't have happened. It couldn't have happened like that. And that's what hit me, was that he didn't know. And I think I waffled with that for a while. It was like, well, did he drink so much that he just blacked out? Or
Was it a trauma response?
was it a trauma response? You know, did he have... Now, of course, this does not excuse him in any way, shape, or form, because what he did afterwards, he remembers. He remembers perfectly well.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand that people who commit these atrocities are still human. It's easy to want to turn them into monsters that are separate from us or different from us in some way, because it protects our psyches and makes us think that humans can't be capable of this. But the beings that are capable of most of the worst atrocities in history have always been human.
No, that's true.
So I think we have a hard time as a society accepting that. We want, everyone to be like so out there, so far removed from us that it couldn't be possible. But, I think Mark Redwine was a regular dad. He was a regular guy he had problems. Yeah, he probably had some abuse in his past. Yeah, he probably was a domestic abuser. Definitely was. He definitely was a stalker, right? He was still just a regular guy.
Yeah.
Who had unhealed trauma, who had a bunch of issues. That doesn't excuse anything that he did. But I think it's important to remember, this is why it's hard to talk about domestic violence and child abuse. Because it's hard to remove that idea that a human couldn't possibly hurt a kid.
And in Mark's case, he loved Dylan. He loved his kids, but he had a weird idea of what love was.
He had a weird idea of what his kids were.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, no. I totally agree.
He saw them as property. Well, I'm glad we covered this case, and I'm glad I did this with you. I wouldn't want to do this with anybody else, honestly. But yeah, thank you for going on this journey with me and trusting me and dealing with my craziness and all the stuff that we've had to deal with.
Well, thank you for trusting me to do this. I was honored to do it because I know that these cases are really hard. They're hard to... It's hard to make the correct projection, and it's hard to talk about some of these things, and it's hard to put it into words. I was honored to be a part of it. I really appreciate you allowing me to do that.
And that'll be the end of the story for Dylan Redwine, which is really weird to say.
I know.
It's weird to say.
It's really weird to say. I felt like that was going to be your career.
It pretty much is now. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening and watching. Stay safe, New Mexico.